Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a floral posy ring button. This button is based on a little set in my collection that uses a technique that I don't know documented for Dorset buttons, nor do I know it documented for Northern European zwirnknopfe buttons. All that I know is that the card that this little set has been mounted onto was printed in Great Britain. During my 1 button a day 2020 challenge, I did a little button based on this called Hawthorn, and this button I referred to the technique as a Lincolnshire button because I'm in Lincolnshire. So let's get started. In order to make this button, you'll need a ring. I'm using a ring with a rounded profile as a traditional Dorset button. You can use a flat one if you prefer. I'm also going to be using number 12 cotton perle, and it's on the spool at the moment. So I'll be using it directly from the ball. I'm going to put a little bit of beeswax onto the ring. This will just help to stop sliding. I'm going to hold the end of the thread at the back of the ring, and then I'm going to come up from bottom to top across the face of the button ring, which I'll refer to as a mold. And I'm just going to wrap a few times, and I'm wrapping as neatly as I can side by side. I'm going to rotate the ring just slightly, and I'm going to wrap one wrap that at the bottom is touching the others, and at the top leaves a little bit of a space. Okay. And then I'm going to go back and fill that space. Tweak a little bit with my nail. I think I can probably get one more in there. And then I'm going to rotate again slightly. And I'm going to repeat again. So touching at the bottom and a gap at the top. And now I'm going to fill it. Now the reason that I'm doing it this way is because this will result in a flatter profile at the center of the button. So it's keeping it quite flat by doing it in stripes like this. And so I'll just carry on working around the button. It doesn't matter how many spaces you do in between each of them. What matters is that the thread is lying as neatly as possible along the edge of the button, because the edge is what you're going to see. Now I'm just tweaking here so I can get one more into that space. And then I think that will probably do. Now you still have to hold on to this. The next thing that we have to do is to fasten the back. I'm just going to bring in my third hand just to hold that in place, which will allow me to
trim the thread off and thread a needle so that I can work the back. So hold that in, and then at the back I'm just going to secure these threads. I'm just going to secure them by wrapping it a few times. That end thread should be pretty well secured, the beginning thread in actual fact, but you can wrap around that a couple of times too. And then we can trim both of these close. Now, that basically is it for your covering. You can tweak it around a little bit to cover up the ring. And of course, that's not really going to withstand much use because the threads can be tweaked because they can move. A Dorset button, of course, would cover the ring first with blanket stitches, and a zwirnknopfe button would fill the gaps between these. So this is neither of those techniques. It may well have originated in amongst one of those, certainly, but it is a different method than either of them traditionally. So you need something to hold these in place, and the solution is French knots. You can of course use colonial knots if you prefer. You could use bullion knots. To be honest, you could pretty much do any embroidery that you want because it's done on a ring. You go through both sides. So let's stick to the sort of what I'm basing it on. And I'm going to use a slightly thicker thread now. I'm going to go up to a number 8 cotton perle. And I'm going to use a chenille needle. I'm going to thread up a chenille needle. Now I'm using a chenille needle because it's got a sharper point, so I can go through and hopefully pierce the threads in as many areas as possible, which will also help to hold everything together. Just putting a knot in one end. So the first thing to do is secure this supplemental thread to the back of your button. Now, working a French knot on a button ring isn't always the easiest thing to do, which is why I quite like the colonial knot, but it's obviously quite doable. So one way of doing it, hold the button between 2 fingers, wrap your needle, and then insert your needle, remembering that it mustn't go back down the same place it came up. Otherwise, your knot's going to end up on the other side. Hold the knot in place while you're pulling that down, and you should get a nice knot. Now, you can, if you prefer, go ahead and use something like the third hand to hold your button while you're working if you want to have 2 hands free. Which can help you to hold on to that French knot a little more easily as you pull through. I'm going to work round this way, I think, first. And basically, you're just going to fill this in with flowers. You can actually make them into sort of a proper floral shape. I'll show you on my, this is button number 97 from my One Button a Day 2020. And you see, I've actually worked them as individual flowers around the edge. But you can also just do, as I'm doing here, and create a wreath of random flowers. So although it looks quite straight at the moment, when we add a few colors, it will then become a wreath. So you can see it's coming along. I will just carry on and keep working the French knots and building them up. Sometimes I use the clips, sometimes I won't. I quite like to hold them in my hand when I'm working, just something that I do. And that is something, you see what's happened right there? I pulled it just a little bit too tight, and I only had one thread there, which has meant that the French knot has pulled right through. So if that happens, just be a little bit more gentle and don't pull so tight. You can bring it up again with your needle. And that's the other thing. If you get crooked knots, that also is fine. There's plenty of crooked knots on the originals that I have. Normally, when I'm working and using the third hand for work like this, I normally would have it facing up like this to work, but I don't think that that's going to be very helpful to you on film, hence me having it bent down. So I want to make sure you can actually sort of see more or less what it is that I'm doing and understand what I'm doing. But the nice thing about it is because it moves about, you can fix it into however is most comfortable for you. I'm going to change colors now. So at the back, I'll just weave this through just to fasten it off. I don't think I'm going to be using that because I'm going to start getting really particular with my placement, and if I can't have it facing me, the way that I normally work, it will be easier for me to hold this in my hand. Now let's see. That's a fairly good contrast. I don't want my colors to appear too similar. So, as before, I'll just attach the new color to the back. And then I can go ahead and work more French knots. Now my knot has just slightly pulled the threads at the edge, so you can see a little bit of the ring. So just tweak that if that's necessary. And if you need to, you can always put in a couple of knots to help hold the threads, the edge threads, where they should be. We're pretty much covered now. One thing that every one of the buttons that I've seen of this type have in common, not that I've seen a lot, I've probably seen 3, as I don't know where they originated from, is that the center, instead of having all of these loose threads, the center is always filled with French knots to match the edge. So in this case, going back to the green thread, that covers up all of those wraps at the center. You can't see then if they're even or not, which is part of what I said, that you don't need to actually worry so much. But you do, by keeping it flatter, it is a bit easier than spiraling it so that you get a dome at the center. So we'll fasten in some green and carry on and work some knots in the center. And so I'll just fasten that off at the back. There we have it. One little flower wreath button or floral wreath button. And they really are sweet little buttons. And of course, you can make them in any colors to match anything at all. And it's just a really nice little button. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little video. And do please click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified when I've uploaded a new video. And click like and everything else. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.